It's weird because I will argue tooth and nail that art should never be a competition, and yet ironically at the same time, my whole feeling is to be nominated for anything is a win. I try not to invest too much in it because I worry about my own ego. It feels nice for the movie to be recognised. It feels nice as an actor to be recognised for your work. I'm not trying to overachieve here.
Beautiful, ain't it? What is?
I can remember the first time I read the novella and realised that Train Dreams was doing, now that it's a movie, it's doing something very different to other movies in that it is one of those stories that really gets under the hood of an average, ordinary human being, a fictional character, but we feel like we get to know him as if he's real, but he's not someone that monuments are made about, or there's no celebration of him being like the kind of achiever that we usually watch in movies, the person that saves the world or wins a war or any of those things. And I think most of us are that. Most of us that watch movies feel we're ordinary. So it's nice to see our own experience reflected, and there's an epicness and a majesty to ordinariness in that we watch these things that we think are normal but is not falling in love and becoming a parent. Are these not two of the biggest things that happen to a normal person in life? And we get to watch that play out in the fabric of a normal life. And I think there's a reason that people get to reflect their own experience in it, and that's why I think people are connecting with Train Dreams. I had the experience before of a relatively non-verbal character in Richard Loving with Jeff Nichols, and knowing that my life had somewhat come to a place where I felt like more than any other character I'd played in years, that there was so much resemblance in my life to my character, and that, you know, I am married. I had, when we shot the film, my twins were 2 years old. Everything that matters to me is wrapped up in their safety, and so for anyone who's seen the film knows that, you know, your greatest fears are there to be put on screen. And I'm a contract worker. I'm not chopping down trees, but I am trying to wrestle with how to connect my life as a actor and working, and keep it closer to my family. And all of these things are what Robert's going through. I'm just like holding an axe in the movie and doing a different kind of job. But because there's few words, knowing that I have these feelings, knowing that I have a lot of this experience, I figured that if I was honest and true to these things, that the camera will find it and the audience will understand what's going on in my mind. I found one of my favourite directors in Clint. In many ways, he also bears a lot of resemblance to the good nature and virtuous qualities of the character I play. Clint, thankfully, is more full of words than my character. He's very articulate and very sensitive. He's a great collaborator, but he's also a director that's not a collaborator to his own downfall. You know, I think sometimes directors want to please actors and agree to their ideas too easily and bend to the will of other people around them. Clint really has a clear idea of what his vision is, but he's also willing to listen to people's opinion. And as a filmmaker, I found he was a perfect mix of very well planned, intentional. There was no sort of arbitrary, let's just shoot and then I'll work it out in the edit room approach to filmmaking here. This was like a very carefully planned and intentional film, while also allowing us, if you notice in the scenes with Felicity and the family, of opening up moments of improvised sort of family life. He's a very special guy, and I think he and Greg Quidar, and you almost have to see them both as a unit. Two very special filmmakers that I'm very pleased to have come across. any moment you're working with a child or with animals, you know, is the old W.C. Fields quote of like never work with animals or children. 100% agree in one sense, but only if you're trying to make an animal or a child adhere to something you wrote down on a page. You know, the idea that, you know, we had a scene of, for example, scenes of my character saying farewell to the family, and they're written a certain way, but you don't expect a 2-year-old to go, read the sides, really excited for this scene, you know. So you have to find a way of creating an environment where you elicit the essence of what the scene needs to be through another means, which is, in this case, you've got to let the child or the chicken or the animal dictate what it is and find the right thing. So it became a wonderful scenario of creating moments of play to allow certain moments to emerge rather than dictate what they should be. And they become some of my favourite moments in the film, walking around the forest with young Katie and chasing chickens around the yard and trying, like I do, very successfully and often hopelessly, connect with my own children. You know, so a farewell with a flower and saying goodbye in my world is like me trying to talk to my kids on FaceTime and have them walk away and not care, and it becomes a sadness in yourself. Why did they not realise the significance that I'm sad to go away? And that was some of the great moments on set, actually. It was great to watch Clint know that he'd written a farewell scene, for example, with the family, with Katie, the young Katie, and realise very quickly that while it was set inside the cabin, she just didn't want to be inside the cabin. And rather than tear his hair out and go, how do we stay on this track? Going, all right, well, let's throw everything away and deputise myself and Adolfo to, you know, and thankfully he'd created a scenario where that cabin was in a plot of land. We could move anywhere we wanted without seeing a single modern piece of technology or power line. So we could literally go on a journey and wander off into the forest. There's a wonderful moment in the film where Katie and I are playing in the forest and she hands me something. She's like, egg. And she's handing me a piece of animal poo. And you can't script that. But it becomes this beautiful kind of like discovered moment. So Clint was like amazing at deputising his crew. He does what I think Catherine Bigelow does well and once said is hire the best people and let them give them the reins, you know, and I think that was Clint's mentality, which works well. Felicity and I had been dancing around the idea of working together for a long time, and it had nearly happened before. And I've known her for like almost 20 years, I think. I saw her in a stage play in London and had a meeting with her years ago. So we finally get to work together in this movie, and I'm always curious what it's like to get a front row seat with people that you really admire, and I very much admire Felicity and her performances over the years, because you never really know what an other actor's process is, and nor do I really want to know. I don't really want to talk necessarily about my own process, but somehow you plug into each other and make it work. And I sort of discovered just by observation that Felicity is one of these actors that I really admire, who is has a very good dramaturgical understanding of story, but then an ability on the day just to kind of let all that go and just sort of be a great listener and a great scene partner. And we were tasked with building the fabric of a marriage that wasn't just about pure romance, but it was about domestic life. It was about the tension that can arise around economics and the future, and yet still a longing and a love. And a lot of that was because of Felicity's careful thinking about the full dimensions of those things, and we had a wonderful time. Clint and I had spoken a lot about finding a sense of humour for the film. Obviously, you want to balance out some of the heavier things that happen, and also remind yourself that life is, at any point, sits on a fence and can tip into joy or sorrow and, happiness or tragedy. That Robert has his own sense of humor that's kind of like I call it like dad humor. But the real joy and the real spark comes from this sort of, as he's described in the book, in the film, as a gadabout, a raconteur and a storyteller, and someone that you go, I don't even know if I believe everything you say, but God, I want to listen to it. And that's Bill Macy. And he has an irascible, cheeky spirit to himself as a human being. He never takes himself too seriously, and yet he's an extraordinary actor, and I think he often kind of is self-effacing, which is a disarming quality for him, knowing how extraordinary he is. And I was such a fan of his, and, I don't get starstruck by too many people, and but Bill was a very important part of my life as a kid, at teenager or whatever, at drama school, because Fargo had very quickly made it onto my sort of top 10 movies list, largely due to his performance. So I was very excited to work with him, and I sort of put aside my excitement to go to work with him, and had such a blast. And this is the important thing, is like, work is one thing, but conduct is another thing. I really admire people who are really excellent at what they do and are also really excellent human beings. And Bill sort of effortlessly brought the nature of his character to the entire set. He would play ukulele and harmonica for people. He was telling stories. And I'm like, is this the real Bill? Or is this some kind of like, him in a way being quite immersive and just going, I'm kind of on people's, the moment I arrive at set, I'm going to entertain people and tell them stories. I had a very good experience with him. I think Kerry is one of these people. I don't, in no condescending way, I'm really so thrilled to see people realise in the last few years how excellent she is. I think anyone who's known her or worked with her in the past has always known that she's never less than excellent, and she always adds value to any story that she's involved in. I worked with her in 2003, and she was a teenager, and you could tell then that she was just extraordinary. And we are considered to be like old friends in the story, and so really in real life we've stayed connected for 20-something years. She is the character that, as we move along the story, and I think the great fear when I was reading the screenplay is going, oh, please don't let this be Robert leading into a new romance, because I think the power of the connection I have with Kerry's character, Claire, in the film is this sense of the people that we encounter in our lives that we don't realise we needed to know, that we needed to meet them, because there's a platonic kinship, shared experience that allows Robert finally, after holding on to all this feeling, to express himself. And, the scene on the Watchtower is one of my favourite scenes in the movie, and we shot it all in the space of about an hour and a half. And yet you would think that would feel, it's a long dialogue scene, that we would be like panicked and rushing, but it felt like time stood still. And I use the word front row, the expression front row seat. I get a front row seat to just an extraordinary performance from Kerry, and like every single visitation of, I'm working on the film, working with Felicity for a couple of weeks at the cabin, and then I go off into the woods with Will Macy, and then I have this sort of, a few days with Kerry, and they were just, all of them so unique and different and excellent. And, similarly with Nathaniel Arcan, and with the beautiful John Deal, who's so wonderful. All the stuff around kids stuff, you know, it's a little weird. I think I go to work quite often when I'm looking at things. I'm like, where's the challenge in this for me? What am I going to learn? How do I do something that I haven't feel like is a familiar path I've trodden? And you know, dealing as a young father. No, I'm not a young father. I'm an older father, but a father of young kids. Dealing with the stuff that I deal with in this movie, on one hand, made things easier because it was I didn't have to stretch my imagination too far to talk about or express fears, but also like not easy in sort of like stuff you don't really want to think about. There's this section in the film where Robert feels like he's having visitation from his daughter, and it became like a lot of heady conversation actually with Clint about, is this real? Is it something Robert is imagining? Is it someone else's child and he's projecting what his desires or hopes are onto that? And the realization that it didn't really matter, because what Robert believes is that it's real. But for the audience, it can be whatever they interpret it to be. But it felt like a double devastation to know that this visitation happens. And it's one of the beautiful things about the novella actually is the inclusion of the strangeness of the natural world, the two-headed calf, the wolf girl. It's part of the beauty of Dennis Johnson's novella that Clint has managed to harness in the film. You know, I tried to get my hands on the rights to the book years ago, and they were taken. And I'm happy to say they were taken because I got to do this movie with Clint. Serendipitously, he comes to me 4 years later and asks me to be in it, and I'm now a dad, and I'm like, all right, well, how do you imagine this movie coming to be? You know, how do we find the prehistoric nature of these forests that are somewhat gone? So going to these environments was fascinating to me, is going into the old forests, sitting beside a tree that had fallen down, that's trunk the circumference is like the size of a small house, and realizing that there is still pockets of that exist and that we could shoot in those environments was kind of marvelous. So I just sort of marveled at the way Clint had managed to, in 29 days, do what Dennis did in 115 pages, Clint does in an hour and 40 minutes, of tell the breadth of an entire person's life. I think is quite an achievement. The thing that I think Clint has created very confidently is a film that doesn't tell you what you should be thinking or what you should be taking away from it. By looking into the decades of an ordinary person's life and the experiences of pure joy and the tougher stuff, in a way it becomes whatever it needs to be for whoever's watching it. I have noticed for very young people sometimes a sense of real deep sadness about the things that may be in store for them in life, because we're not going to all be skipping our way through life clicking our heels. And I have seen reflected from people who have been knocked to their knees by some experience, there is also a hopefulness in looking at the joys and tragedies of another person's life and going, life is worth living. For me, I think the movie it made me feel that I want to be present and that I want to cherish the things and the people that are important to me. And that one day I hope that I don't look back and that I treated those people or those experiences lightly, or that I wasn't really paying attention. It starts to sort of raise these questions for me about what is the purpose of it all? Like, and is it all worth it? Our short time on the planet. And I find a real sort of hopefulness out of the film. And I think it's it also sits in that canon of movies which I refer to as a kind of a, you know, like a happy cry movie, and not that it's there to make people cry, but this ability to make you pull out some of that feeling you have inside of you, and it's not necessarily a bad thing.